Welcome to those who came, to those who have been watching. I don't know how many people have been watching, but I've seen the numbers go up. There are sources somewhere in the back. I think I have this script memorized now. First of all, thank you to our sponsors for the overall program, for the matching fund, to David and Serena Koshitsky, in memory of Riva Koshitsky, Zechrona Livracha. There's sheets in the back, and to the Weinbaum Foundation for their generous sponsorship. Today is, in addition to showcasing the shiurim that we give throughout the year, it's also a fundraiser for university programming, for our daily programming for men here at Or Chaim, and for women at Ulpan Harot, which we've expanded this year, including stipends. Any funds today up to $10,000 will be matched. I don't know what number we're up to anymore. I have lost count at some point. We were somewhere over 8,000 last I checked. This year has been sponsored, if I remember correctly, by Rabbi Mordechai Turchiner and Karen Turchiner in honor of the members of the families of the members of the Kollel. I think that's all the announcements that I'm supposed to make. Okay, so the topic that I want to deal with today is industrial kosher supervision necessary? So for those who know, Howie knows this well, one of my hobbies in life is to discuss issues in methodology of psak, right? Issues that are more expansive than local halachic questions, but actually touch on the more conceptual, the overarching themes that emerge in psak. And sometimes I like to do overarching themes, and sometimes I like to tackle it through individual tshuvot, individual responsa that address the issues with an eye to the more global underlying issues. So what spurred this one were two tshuvot that were published in the first volume of the Tshuvas Minchas Asher, of Asher Weiss. In the last few years, he's come out now with 3 volumes of his Tshuvot, and he is, as people know, one of my favorite poskim and one of the most significant living poskim today. And he was asked in 2 Tshuvot whether it was necessary to have industrial kashrus. Now that question, I'm going to draw on him a little bit, but that question really divides into several different issues. So anyone who's ever learned Hilchos Kashrus, who's learned Yeridea, knows that there's many things, many kulos, many laws that most people don't know about and are convinced are not kosher, right? The first thing that happens when you go through smicha and you learn Yeridea is you realize that you are way too stringent in your kitchen, right? Anyone who has not yet learned Yeridea, if they see someone who has learned it cook in the kitchen, they are convinced that the kitchen is treif, is not kosher. This is inevitable. In my house, Ora learned Yeridea the year before I did, and my family was mostly vegetarian growing up because my mother was vegetarian. So we really didn't have meat in the house very much. So I had no idea. I didn't have any mimetic tradition of any sorts. I had no idea. This was a gap in my knowledge. So Ora had to tell me, don't worry, when you learn Yeridea, you will know that I'm not treifing up the kitchen. So things like bitul, right? If something not kosher falls in, it's less than 1/60th, and you don't taste it, without getting into all the details, it is nullified. Done, and it is kosher. Unless there's an onion, right? The answer is generally kosher. Other things, right? Sveikos, cases of doubt, often we can be lenient. Now, anyone who knows anything about industrial kashrus knows that this is not how industrial kashrus looks. They do not rely on bitul, they do not rely on nullification, they do not rely on ne'emanus echad, right? They don't rely on the testimony of a single witness, right? They have a mashgiach, depending on the case, either a mashgiach tamidi or a mashgiach who yotze v'nichnas, who comes in and out, or they have cameras, or whatever the case may be, depending on the organization, but we don't rely on any of these kulot. Now the question is, why? So that's the first question I want to deal with. So that's unit 1, right? Can a kosher organization rely on the rules of bitul savik echad? They don't, but why is that? So it starts on a formal level with, I didn't give you the whole sugya, I just gave you the line in Shulchan Aruch in source 1. The Shulchan Aruch says, Ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. While it is true that if a little bit of milk falls into your meat pot, it's less than 1/60th, you don't taste it, it is kosher. You can't take a little bit of milk and mixed it into your meat. That's called bitul isur lechatchila, right? You're not allowed to actively nullify. Va'afilu nafal toch heter she'ein bo shir levatlo, and mosifin alav heter kedei levatlo, and even if it falls in to, let's say, 1 in 30, and now you could add, you can't nullify it. Avaru bitlo, if you do nullify it, o sheriba alav, or you add to it such that it is nullified, im b'shogeg, if it's by accident, mutter, so then it's permitted. V'im b'mezid, and if it was on purpose, aser l'mevatel atzmo, so the person who nullified it himself cannot eat that food. Imhu shelo, right, if it's his, v'chein l'mishin mitbatel b'shvilo, and if he nullified it for somebody else, or with someone else in mind, they also can't have it. Now, when we say that you can't nullify it for that it was done for you, that you now can't eat it, so what does that include? Right, that's ambiguous. Does that mean I asked Jacob to put milk in my meat? I'm not eating meat. Other way around. I asked him to put meat in my milk. It's not a halachic comment. It's just that I'm a vegetarian. That was not halachic at all, right? So I asked him to nullify the meat. Is that what we're talking about? Where not only do I know, but I told him to do it for me, or, right, even if I don't know, the fact that he did it for me means that it is now prohibited to me, and I can't eat this pot of milk, this pot of dairy. So the Taz in number 2 says, "Dahainu dafka sheyoda zeshenit badel avuro v'nichole." It's only if I know and I want it. Afilu lo tzivoto. I don't have to tell him to do it. I don't have to go that far. But if I know about it and I'm okay with it, so then it's as if it was done for me, and therefore I cannot eat it. It's considered for me bittul isur lechatchila. Avalim lo yada mimenu. But if I had no idea what he was doing, shari le daharehu kishogeg. Because then, if I didn't know what he was doing, so then it was an accident. So then the question becomes in poskim, okay, fine. So I understand on a local level. But what happens, I keep forgetting to put this in, but what happens if I don't know per se, but the person who is being mevatel, the person who's nullifying, isn't Jacob. It is a company. It's a corporation that knows that they're going to be selling to people, Jews, non-Jews, everybody. Does that count? Is the fact that he knows that an Orthodox Jew who cares about kashrus may buy this food, does the fact that he does that, is that called bishvilo? Right? And if it is, right, then it would make sense. Then corporations, right, and to which industrial kashrus organizations are giving hechsherim, wouldn't be allowed to rely on bittul nullification, because since they're selling it, that includes the people who might buy it. And if we were to say there is no need for kashrus, right, for kashrus organizations, there's a need for kashrus, there's no need for industrial kashrus organizations, then, right, then people would be going and just checking ingredients and buying food. So in theory, it's for the Jew. So is that going to make it prohibited? So that is a machlokes. So you look in 3. Rabbi Kiva Eger says as follows: "Ve'embidel al hastam lemisha yirtzeh liknot harehu kimoshe naaseh b'shvilam biyichud va'asurim likulam chuvot rivash in tzadichet." So Rabbi Kiva Eger cites a particular interpretation of the rivash, which is open to a little bit of question, but this is the position of Rabbi Kiva Eger, that if it's someone commercial, right, it's a factory, it's a company, it's a restaurant, and he's selling food, so then since he is cooking for anybody who's willing to buy, then that's automatically considered, right, cooking for you. Fine. If that's the case, then minishma mizeh daf mishin itbatel avaro lo yada mizeh v'lo kataz. Meaning, unlike the Taz, even if you don't know, so then you would not be allowed to eat that food. So now, the simplest first question would be, okay, if we rule like Rabbi Kiva Eger, then yes, Kellogg's cannot, right, needs a hechsher, because if it put in 1/1000th of something not kosher, then it is not batel. The Taz, who says, no, it's only when I knew what they were doing. I have no idea what they're doing, right? I know, I look at the ingredients, the first ingredients, not all of them are kosher. I call them up, I ask if anything was not kosher. They tell me, it might have been, there was something, right, which is, less than 2% not kosher. I didn't know, so according to the Taz, it should be permitted for me to have something that was made by Kellogg's, made by whatever corporation you pick, that has less than 1/60th of Isur, because I didn't know. And we could say that it's very simply a machlokas Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Taz. Now, often people will tell you, well, yes, we need industrial kashrus because we poskim like Rabbi Akiva Eiger against the Taz. Now, in general, that is true that poskim quote Rabbi Akiva Eiger over the Taz. However, as Clapper notes, and this is the 1 in 7, that is not consistently held, right? The same posek who will say, we paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the name of the Rivash, namely that when someone who's selling food nullifies it, you can't rely on bittul, will turn around the next day and say that we paskin like the Taz. Significantly, Ramosha Feinstein, who's one of the people quote, that say, we paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, in his well-known shuvot about whiskey, says the opposite. He said, Kevan Shirov Ayayin Sraf, Nimkar La'akum, said, since most whiskey, hard alcohol, is sold to the non-Jewish world, right? The percentage of people who are buying it who are Jewish is the minority. Nechshav b'masha naseh limkor kinaseh b'shvil harov. So therefore, one second, even if they added something in which wasn't kosher, he says, big deal, right? He's talking about the sherry casks, right? You know they're putting it in, but they're not doing it for you. And Ramosha Feinstein famously permits whiskey which was aged in sherry cask because he said it is batel. What about Rabbi Akiva Eiger? What about the Rivash? Ramosha says, so what? She'ein lahachshav she'nasa b'shvil Yisrael amiyut. Because the minority of people who buy it is Jewish, not the majority, we don't take it into account. So, as Clapper notes, right, the poskim do not consistently rule like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, which would we make you wonder whether, in fact, you can't rely on bittul. Because again, according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, presumably you cannot rely on bittul. And the kashrus organizations are right that if if they add something in which is less than 1/60th, since they're selling also to Jews, you can't eat it. It's considered being mevatel for you. According to the Taz, it's not a problem. Ramosha, well, often he paskins like the Rivash, like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, sometimes in very well-celebrated shuvot that people paskin like, does not, in which case the answer would be no, right? You are allowed to rely on bittul. Moshe, yeah.
Okay, very simple. In industrial kosher, just to let you know, a lot of companies do it as a marketing tool. It's nothing to do with kosher at all.
Okay, I don't want to get into politics. I want to deal with the halachic issue. I'm aware.
As a marketing tool, they're not, couldn't care less if Jews buy it or not.
Correct.
Whatever. So therefore, this wouldn't apply.
So, right now I want to outline the argument. We'll come to it. But, yes, I mean, part of the question here is psychology. Yeah.
But the Basar B'Shishim only refers to Basar B'Chalav.
No, it's Basar B'Chalav. It's only not things which it's not Chametz and Pesach, it's not certain things, but most things are Batal B'Shishim, right? Basar B'Chalav, Treif, Batal B'Shishim, right? It's Batal B'Shishim, that's it. Okay. Then Reb Moshe Feinstein makes a different argument that kashrus organizations like to quote a lot, which is, okay, even if you don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, you paskin like the Taz, in 5, mikol makom, michu'ara davar lashkiach b'lo hagala. Still, Reb Moshe has this notion that even when something is technically mutter, when you're dealing with the public, you're dealing with something en masse for everybody. It's just, in Yiddish, pasnisht. Right? You shouldn't rely on, kulos, you shouldn't rely on leniencies, and therefore you shouldn't rely on bittul, and you shouldn't rely on sveikos, and you shouldn't rely on single witnesses, and you should have a mashkiach, and all those things, because mechuar adavar. The Reb Feivel Cohen goes further. Reb Feivel Cohen in the Badei HaShulchan says it's more than that. He said, if you have a hechsher, so then it might be true what Moshe says, that they don't really care about the frum community. It's a marketing tool. There are people who they want the frum community, they want the people who think it's healthier, they want the people who know it's vegan, they want all the people, all the things that kosher now carries with it. But he says that may be true, but in the end of the day, once he has a hashgacha, if he wants to put in a new ingredient, he has to ask the mashgiach. And if he wants to keep the hechsher, he has to listen to the mashgiach. So therefore, once you have a mashgiach, it's not just the Taz, right? Sorry, it's not just the Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Even the Taz would say you can't rely on bittul, because since he has to ask the mashgiach, am I allowed to do this? Now it's considered al piv, that it's done by instruction of the Jew. So between Reb Moshe and Reb Akiva and Reb Feivel Cohen, And sometimes posting Rabbi Akiva Eiger, so cautious organizations say that yes, we can't rely on bittul, we can't rely on Eid Echad, we can't rely on all those leniencies because either we posting Rabbi Akiva Eiger that once it's industrial, you can't rely on these leniencies, or two, it's at least pasnish, right? It's not the right thing to do, and three, maybe it's worse that even the Taz would agree that when you have a mashgiach who has some say, you can't rely on bittul. But this all begs a very important question. This Rav Asher Weiss doesn't deal with, but I want to deal with it because I think it's a very important question. All of this begs the question. Because all of this says, if you already have an industrial kashrus organization, then you can't rely on bittul. But they don't ask the more fundamental question, which is, fine, so get rid of industrial kashrus, go back to when everyone read labels, and then all you possibly have is Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but you don't have Rav Moshe, because Rav Moshe said a kashrus organization shouldn't rely on leniencies. Great, so get rid of kashrus organizations and go back to reading ingredients. Rav Feivel Cohen says when there's a mashgiach, they have to listen to him. Good, so get rid of the mashgiach and read the ingredients. Right? All of this is not an argument for why kashrus organizations have to exist. It's an argument for why kashrus organizations create more halachic problems than they solve. And this is what Clapper notes in 7. And I'll tell you the story and then we'll read it inside. Okay? He had an interesting case. This is like 20 years ago. There's a milk producer in New England, Gorelick Farms. So I told Jacob about this. You're gonna have to hear it again. I'm sorry. So they produce milk. At the beginning of the omega-3 craze, right? Everyone wanted fish oil with omega-3s. So they decided they were going to put in fish oil, but they chose a interesting fish. They chose a shark. So what happened? So the KVH took away their hechsher, and one of their competitors decided, hey, we can run a smear campaign against Gorelick milk. And they created an ad campaign, the theme of which was there's something fishy about Gorelick milk. Now this inevitably led to a libel suit. Because Gorelick Farm says, what are you talking about? Right? It doesn't taste like shark oil, doesn't taste like fish. This is libel. So it came to court. Now, let's read inside. Right? Let's read what happened. So many years ago, Gorelick Farms decided to market its milk all natural, which meant that it needed a natural source of vitamin D. Sorry, this was vitamin D. It was even before the omega-3. I just assumed it was omega-3. Fine. And it chose shark oil. This had at least two consequences. Hood Dairy began running an ad with the tagline, there's something fishy about Gorelick Farms milk. And the KVH, this was long before I came involved, right? Clapper is now involved, but he wasn't then, pulled its hashgacha. Gorelick Farms sued Hood, arguing that the fish was imperceptible, and won. Right? So this was the interesting thing. It came to court, and the judge, it was a libel suit, so what do you have to do? He had to taste it. And he tasted it, and he said, you're right, it doesn't taste like fish, it's libel. And so the non-Jewish judge tasted the milk and agreed there was no fish taste. I therefore ruled that the milk was kosher because the KVH had pulled its hashgacha. Right? Why? And we'll see that Bleich agreed. And listen to this argument. He says as follows. The judge taste test demonstrated that the shark oil was nullified. Certainly the percentage was below 160 anyway. So the only remaining issue was deliberate nullification, meaning bittul lechatchila, which makes a product prohibited to the person or person from whose benefit the nullification occurred. Rabbi Akiva Eiger states that a nullification done with no specific end user in mind, but rather for whomever will wish to buy, is considered to be done for the benefit of all eventual purchasers. One understanding of this position is that anything consciously produced with observant Jews in mind has that issue, even if the observant Jews are a trivial percentage of the intended audience. Right? We saw that that's an understanding of Rabbi Akiva Eiger and the Rivash. So he said, but wait a second, here's a catch. If this was before the kashrus organizations existed and people knew that from Jews read ingredients, so maybe you could say that according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, they're producing for the from Jews. But here it's even better, because now the kashrus organizations exist and they pulled their hashgacha. So what do they think? No from Jew will drink our milk. So now we know for sure they're doing it not for Jews. So even Rabbi Akiva Eiger can't argue that this is for Jews. So what happened? However, by giving up its kosher certification, Gorelick Farms demonstrated that it did not have any concern for observant Jews, right? They said, we're putting in shark oil, big deal, so we're getting rid of the hashgacha. And therefore the milk was kosher because it's lost its hechsher. Paradoxically, had the KVH accepted this argument and sought to restore the hechsher, the milk would have become treif. My contrarian ambition was to develop a list of products that were kosher only when unhechshered, as many industrial koshering procedures ultimately depend on some form of nullification. Note, however, that this broad interpretation of the prohibition is not obvious either in Rebbe Akiva Eiger or in the cited source, response to Rivash 498, and it's not followed consistently in practice today, quoting the Reb Moshe that I just quoted by Whiskey. So, right, Clapper said, first of all, we don't consistently paskin like Rivash. Second of all, maybe the Rivash in general didn't really mean this when the from Jews are such a minuscule percentage of who's buying. But whatever you think, for sure, when they lose their hashgacha over it, they think that no from Jew who cares about kashrus is drinking this milk. Therefore, you had a goy, it was less than a 60th. You had a non-Jew taste it. Right? So you have kveila, which, without getting into machlokas, Ashkenazim, Sfardim, you had a kveila plus 60, right? Plus less than a 60th. You knew there was no taste, right? He was Mesiach Lefi Tumo. He wasn't talking about kosher, he was talking about libel law. And they lost their hashgacha, so they think no from Jew is drinking the milk. So now the milk is kosher. But if you put a hechsher back on, so that means you run into the problem of the Badei HaShulchan, right? Because now the Jew is actually saying, yes, you can keep your shark oil because of bittul. Right? And you run into the problem of Moshe Feinstein that even that's technically mutter mechuara davar, disgusting. So, right, Clapper said, I thought that this was compelling, but creative psak. And to make sure I really believed it, I went out and bought a quart of milk and drank a glass before posking that anyone else could do so. I think Ray Clapper said he might be watching the shiur. So kudos to you. But Dov Weinstein showed me that in a current issue of Tradition, my teacher, Rabbi J. David Bleich, makes the same argument, and here is his quote. Paradoxically, according to Rebbe Akiva Eiger, a product that otherwise would be permitted may become forbidden by virtue of the fact that it is certified as kosher. Products produced for the mass markets are not produced for the benefit of Jews. Accordingly, if some small quantity of not kosher ingredient is present but nullified, the product is permissible. The same product, if produced for a Jew, according to the opinion of Rebbe Akiva Eiger, even for an unspecified anonymous Jew, is prohibited. Kosher certification is sought by a producer precisely because he wishes to market his product to the Jewish consumer. Targeting the Jewish consumer as a potential customer creates a situation in which nullification is carried out expressly for the purpose of a Jew, and hence, according to Rebbe Akiva Eiger, a Jew may not benefit from such nullification. Accordingly, he's talking about stem cells. Stem cell burgers might be produced that are indeed kosher, but they would become prohibited if labeled as such.
That's incorrect.
What?
Not market for Jews. You have laundry detergent, you have salt, you have sugar. It's zero to do with Jews.
So in the end of the day, they do think that they're going to get a bigger market. The question of why they put achshirim on non-edible things,
Vegetarians,
also for vegetarians, but also for Jews.
They're nothing. They're such a minority.
They're
not doing it for them.
They're also doing it for Jews, and
Precisely.
okay, meaning, like I said, I agree with you that we can question whether it's only for Jews, but if it's even part of, right, he's careful with his language, right? He said even if he's targeting Jews as part of his calculation.
Laundry detergent, things that have zero to do.
Correct, but that doesn't need a hechsher. That doesn't need a, right, this is not, laundry detergent, I saw over Pesach, someone posted on Facebook a huge, like, metal canister, like 50 feet tall, of rat poison, which a big picture, the big skull and crossbones, and underneath a badatz eda charedas kosher lepesach. So yes, right, okay, so I understand there are certain things that are not food, that they do it for whatever reason they do it, but partially they do it for Jews because they know that even people who know there's no reason that tinfoil should have a hechsher, something tells them when they see two things, one with an OU and without, that they just feel like, right? Okay, but who are they marketing for, right? Partially from Jews. Now, it depends which city, right? And it depends whether you're a national, international, or local company, right? A local producer in New York City it's not insignificant, right? If he is in the Diamond District, right, and he's doing, that's significant already, right? Kellogg's, I don't know how significant it is for Kellogg's. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm sure certain things it's not significant at all. They put a hechsher because, okay, big deal. So we'll put that, we'll put halal, we'll put whatever. The same way people would put 15 hechsherim. How many more people do you get if it has an OU over if it has the Satmar hechsher and the Bava hechsher and the Papa hechsher? I don't know. But they do it because what does it hurt?
The words he's using is kosher certification is
I-
produced precisely.
I understand. I understand that maybe Rebbe Bleich is going a little bit far because there are many reasons nowadays while people do it. Now, part of it is, it's an interesting question halachically. How would we gauge the fact that people use kosher to get other constituencies? Because then they're not doing it for Jews, but they are doing it to be kosher, right? So yesh ladun, right? So I could hear the taina, but so far what we have, and we just summarize and then we'll take questions. So far what we have is, what? Car keys. Yes, I do have the car key. I think, or did I leave it on the thing? Yeah. Okay. So to summarize what we have so far, okay? So normally, when someone will give a shiur on industrial kashrus and explain why we need mashgichim to not rely on bittul, to not rely on testimony of a single witness, and not to rely on doubt, and not to rely on all the different things we don't rely on, they will quote Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and then they'll quote Ramosha, and then they'll quote the Badei Shulchan, and they'll say, either we paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger that when something is industrially produced, so it's for everybody, including the Jews. And even if that's not true, it's not right that you should rely on kulos. And besides, once you have a mashgiach, so you have to ask his permission. But the problem with that is, A, we don't across the board paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger. And once you don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, that all falls apart. Unless you have the Badei Shulchan. Maybe the Badei Shulchan doesn't. And Mechur Hadavar, and even Rabbi Akiva, and for Feivel Cohen only, right, beg the question, because they are really asking the second question, is, okay, once we have kosher organizations, why can't they rely on bittul? It doesn't answer the question, why did we go from what existed before we had kosher organizations of reading labels to having kosher organizations? Which is why I brought in Rai Clapper, that there are cases where, yes, even if you paskin like all those things, it's true you can't rely on bittul. But it's because you have a hechsher in the first place that you created that problem. If you remove the hechsher, you remove the problem. Now, we can wonder, right, this is the irony, right? In a world where there are no hechsherim, so his argument doesn't work as well as in a world where there is hechsherim, right? When there is a hechsher, so by taking away a hechsher, you think you're not targeting Orthodox Jews, right? Before hechsherim, everyone knew in theory that Orthodox Jews would buy even if they didn't care, right? Okay. But the point is that in the end begs the question, which is fine. But how did we get to this point that we're relying on this that we're worried about this to begin with? We had question, Howie, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure if it works this way right now, but the London Bait Team used to work that a lot of the products that they gave hechsher for never had a.
But then on the hechsher they have a list.
They have a list, so other people wouldn't know that it's there.
Correct. So in Europe, right, they have less. I assume because of that they have less, vegans and. Natural, whatever, who are looking at hechsherim, I assume, as opposed to like the OU, the OK, the Star K, whatever.
And again, I'm not saying currently, but it used to be that the OU did not recognize some of the London Bait Team's hechsher because they were soymech on some of these things.
Well, that's.
They were relying on the factory. They were
okay.
The list.
Okay.
They were doing.
Right, and look, there's a good argument to be made, right? Meaning, if someone just said, look, we don't consistently pass like the Rivash, and I don't know what Moshe is talking about, Mechuara Davar, and I don't know what the Badei Shulchan is talking about, that the Mashgiach is in charge, right? I could hear all those arguments. Meaning, even with all of those, you could just say, I don't agree. We pass like the Taz and done with it. I don't agree with Moshe, I don't agree with the Badei Shulchan. And if a kosher organization would say that, right, you're telling me that the London Bezdin say, I couldn't say they're wrong. I could say that's not the positions the kosher organizations in North America are relying on. That doesn't mean it's wrong, right? And, and I'm not at all convinced it's wrong. I'm just saying it's a reality that's what they're on. Yeah.
To give you background, this might help also explain a number of things. Originally, there was, forget kosher organization, something that show up once or twice here means nothing, quite honestly.
I don't want to get into politics. I know, okay.
The way it worked at the beginning was people would read ingredients. What people never realized was, and I'll give you a couple examples, there's an amount that can be put in the product.
No, correct.
It's not required to be
Correct. And part of the problem is that.
It was worse. They were making cans at one time, metal, with lard.
Right, they're right. So right, there are all types of things.
There's so many
Right. So now one of the reasons is that, right, now one of the reasons now on a practical level, before we get to the last thing, so on the practical level, one of the things that happened, if you ask kosher organizations, will say, realistically, part of the problem is, and I took your idea with Rabbi Genek. So, he's the CEO of OU Kosher, so I heard a lot of this stuff. So one of them, yes. Certain things, you could look at the ingredients from today to tomorrow, and you'd have no idea that the can was produced with a large film around it, in which case, that's a problem, right? There were other times that he said, yeah, this used to be okay 50 years ago because ingredients, as the ads go now, right? You knew what you were reading, right? But now, what is sodium I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's kosher. I don't know whether it's dairy. I don't know whether it's natural. I don't know what it is, right? And even ingredients you should recognize, you don't recognize because, right? I remember one of my friends was drinking one of these drinks. So now that's less true in the States. I don't know what's true here. So right, and in the States they've changed it a little bit, right? It used to be that anything less than 2%. Now it's a little bit different because of allergens, right? Because now you have a different way because you have allergens, right? Where once you see there's no trace of blah 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 blah, you can be more reliant on that. So a lot of things have changed in the reality. Yep. But it's true. Like they say, a lot of things you just don't know what you're reading. Right, which is true. You have no idea. And that's part of the reason, right? So on the practical level, part of the reason there's kosher organizations is not just we don't rely on bittul. Part of it is really a very important practical concern, is that God knows what is in these things anymore, right? For example, not a kosher's example. One of my friends, I remember he was drinking one of these, what are they, like the Bolt House Farm drinks, like a fruit drink. I don't know if they have it in Canada, right? Which make themselves out as healthy. So some of them are like fruit smoothies, which I guess are somewhat healthy. One of them was like a lemonade. And he's like, what? It's all natural fruit. Look, the first ingredient is healthy. It's all natural cane juice. I'm like, that's fancy English for sugar water, right? They go out of their way to deceive you, right? So part of the problem is that you need kosher organization because what am I looking at? I have no idea. Okay, it's also true, right, that even with all of this, and even with kosher organizations telling you they don't rely on bittul, they don't rely on sveikos, they don't rely on echad, they don't rely on any of that, it's only usually true. So for example, you can look on the OU's website and they will tell you, right, this is not secret, I'm not like publicizing a deep secret, right? There's been a question for a long time that everyone always asks, you're not allowed to have dairy bread. Okay, that's halacha, you're not allowed to have dairy bread. Fine, Thomas's English muffins or OUD. So everyone always asks the OU Kashrus, how can it be that they're dairy, right? It's a problem of pat chalavi. And their answer, everyone always thinks that the answer is it's a special shape. Because one of the kulos that we have is based on one interpretation in the words ke'ein tura, right? Is that you make it in a special shape. So everyone always said, well, it's an English muffin, right? It's specific, we know that it's dairy. But then they say, okay, but that was true when the only people making English muffins were Thomas. Now people make it other ones, and they're ones which are actually pariv, so it should be a problem of dairy bread. So if you look at their tshuva, and it's available on their website, or you can email them if you want the more technical one, I have it on my computer somewhere, right? They'll tell you the reason that it's dairy, it says OUD, is because it has, and I kid you not, less than 1 in 1,000 parts. This one I think is less than 160, right? Less than 160, it's like 1 in 100 or something like that of milk. So why is it D? So it's D because of Ramosha. But they say, we take Ramosha seriously, and Rabbi Akiva Eger seriously, and all that for the purpose of kashrus. But for the Dirabanan, the Chomer Dirabanan of Pat Chalavi, for that we're not worried. I asked them, then I followed up with this and said, what about Ritz crackers? Because Ritz crackers should have the same problem. People put cheese on it, they would put liver on crackers, right? And he said, and here is where he said, no, it's less than 1 in 1,000 parts dairy. Oreos, right? It's a well-known, not well-kept secret, right, that Oreos are pariv, right? Because they have, right? It's like I don't even think it's bittul. That's something with what? It's not even dairy equipment. It's some of them are dairy equipment, but it's whatever it is. It's not dairy. I went to ask Reagan actually, why does it say dairy? He said, to be honest, certain things are dairy because the organizations, he said this was the case in Thomas's. He said, why do you put dairy? He said, because Thomas's told us that the milk provides no taste. So why do they put milk in? Because everyone has this conception. You put milk in, it's creamy. So we put in enough milk so they see it on the ingredients and they think it tastes creamier psychologically. But it has no taste. Mesiach lefi tomo, it has no taste. So we said, okay, fine. So for kashrus, I have to call it dairy. Because it's bittul. Bittul is lechatchila, what Reb Moshe, the Badei Shulchan, etc. But even the kashrus organizations are aware that this argument only goes so far. And the OU specifically tends to be pretty open and pretty transparent about it. If you email them, they really will get back to you. It's very helpful if you want to understand the realia of what's going in, which is where I learned a lot of sort of what's going on. Shiur with Rai Ganak would be the halacha, and then would be like, hak about what's going on at the OU. Yeah, Josh.
Is it possible to understand Rabbi Akiva differently? That when he says Moshe Nasa Bishvila B'yichud, almost is like a braver thing, and then get rid of the whole. But then the whole industrial thing will fall away because it's irrelevant. As in, once you buy it, then you're determined.
Correct. So that's right. So that was one of the things I swallowed. Right, is that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, even Rabbi Akiva Eiger, it's not clear how he understands Rivash, and within Rivash, it's some people take Rabbi Akiva Eiger very expansively, and they say it's breira, right? Yeah. But that's very unclear in Rivash, and we don't paskin like it consistently, right? Because if it was breira, right, we couldn't do it for milk, we couldn't do it for anything. But that expansive read of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, most people don't in the end take, because that's an expansive read of Rabbi Akiva Eiger within an expansive read of the Rivash, right? And the Rivash doesn't seem to say it, right? He doesn't go that far. It's more of if he's actually taking into account Jews, right, even as a minority, but not a breira that the second I buy it, it automatically becomes for Jews, right? You're right. If you took an expansive breira that
industrial thing would fall away, then it would always be a problem.
Correct, then it would always be a problem. Except historically, right? Then you'd have to ask, okay, that was true. Then why did they never have kashrus organizations, right? Which is why it's very unlikely to take the Rivash that expensively, right? I mean, you find tshuva after tshuva in the Rishonim that they would go and they would buy kompot, right? The kompot tshuva appears in every Ashkenazi Rishon, right? It appears in the Rashbam, it appears in the Rozarua, it appears in the Ravan, it appears in the Rav Yah, it appears in Rav Yehuda Bar Avram, it appears everybody, right? We used to buy kompot, right? How do we buy kompot? Maybe there's a little bit of wine, maybe there's a little bit of this. Okay, it doesn't usually, it's batel, right? But if it was breira, you're right? Every time, but we don't actually take that expansive read.
Is
correct.
Breira type of.
It's a breira type of language, and some people try to do it, but it's based on a comparison that the Rivash makes from what's it called? From Maaseh Shabbos, right? It's like, right? It's not a breira thing. It's a Nasa B'Shvilo and Maaseh Shabbos, which has nothing to do with breira. You're right. If you took a super expansive breira, then you would get there, but that doesn't seem to be how the poskim do it. And again, we don't poskim like him consistently, right? And I can, like I said, I can show that to you in Rav Moshe by the whiskey tshuva, and you can ask the OU what they do with Thomas's English muffins. Okay. So then, there's a third tact one could take, and this is what I call meta arguments, right? Which is sometimes poskim make local arguments, and sometimes they say, no, this is how I think halacha should work. One thing you find a lot in poskim, especially in poskim in the 20th century in Israel, is the notion that psak for a community is different than psak for an individual. Right? You find this a lot in Israeli tshuva, with the army, with the police force, with hospitals, with electric companies in Israel, with everything, right? People like Rav Goren, like this is their go-to issue, right? Psak for the tzibur is different. Psak for the tzibur is different. There are poskim who said, okay, so my second question was fine. We've begged the question by bringing up Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Rav Moshe and the Badei Shulchan. Because in the end of the day, not having a kashrus organization would solve those problems, probably, unless we take the expansive read like Josh is suggesting. But maybe the reason we need kashrus organizations, so one is the practical concern that Moshe raised, which is there's lard and there's ingredients you don't understand, and this is 2016, and you have no idea what you were reading, and you don't know if something's avida latama, right? The halacha is something is not batel, if is not nullified, if it's put there for taste. Especially in the realm of flavors, you have no idea what you were looking at, right? It was famous in America for a long time that there was a red dye for candy that was made from, what was it, beetle blood? Was it beetle blood? Something like that, right? Which is put in, I don't know, for taste, for look, whatever, right? And it's maybe avida latama, right? It's made, what?
Small cherries in the fruit cocktail are actually from a fish from Australia.
There you go, right? There were things like that. And those are called, right? And those are called avida latama, right? It's made for taste, and especially in the taste, and the OU will tell you this, that one of the reasons that it's so hard to figure out how to look at labels is because specifically the flavorings, right? You have food chemists, right, who are making a taste which is maybe 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 1,000, but it's meant to add taste, and therefore it's not nullified at all, and you have no idea what it's made of. So there's the practical concern, right? So we can answer the question of is industrial kashrus necessary and say maybe it wasn't in 1850. In 2016, there's a very practical reason why it really is, because you have food chemists making tastes, right, which are made of not kosher things, and you don't know what it is, so you need somebody to tell you what's going on. And that's a good reason. That really is a very good reason. But let's leave that aside. Let's assume it's something that has no added taste, it's vegan, no GMO, whatever, right? It's the, right, naturally produced, I don't know what, okay? So here, some of the Achronim make the following argument. Look in 8 in Doviv Misharim, and he's quoting the Yeshuas Yaakov. And the reason I put the Doviv Misharim and not Yeshuas Yaakov is a very fundamental reason, which is the Doviv Misharim is on Bar Ilan, so I didn't have to retype it, and the Yeshuas Yaakov is not. So he says as follows: Takana sha'osim litmidiyut. If you do something for a consistent basis, in a constant way, yesh lachush gam lemiutei demiyutei. Then you have to be worried even for the smallest minority. V'hu ke'ein divrei Ramban, and it's like the Ramban. Now, which Ramban? So I gave you a summary of it. The Ramban asked the following question. The Gemara, the Mishnah in the beginning of Maseches Ksubos, says that they instituted to have weddings on Wednesday night, so that if it turned out that the woman was not a virgin as she claimed, and therefore she had committed adultery, presumably because she'd had an affair during the period of Erusin, which is halachically marriage, but they aren't living together, so then they would be able to go to Beit Din. And then the Ramban says, but I don't understand. How many women are committing adultery during their first stage of marriage, right? They're in love, right? This is not the time that people, right, the beginning, what we would call engagement, except it's halachically marriage, right? That's not when people usually are committing adultery. So why did we make a decree that everyone should get married on Wednesday night? So the Ramban said, because we're dealing with a community. And when you deal with a community, you set up takanot for the whole community. And you worry even about the smallest minority. And the way the poskim say it is clever. And there's a lot of truth to it. They say this often in the case of pikuach nefesh. They say as follows. Normally, if someone tells you that there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that this is going to kill you, right, but it's probably going to make you better, right, so then you'll take that risk. Because it's 1 in 1,000. But if you are the FDA and you are now making a decision for 320 million people in the United States, so 1 in 1,000, right, do the math, is a lot of people. So as they say, when you're dealing birabim, hamid hofech liot vadai, right? What's a 1 in 1,000 chance will happen to thousands and thousands of people. So he said, if that's the case, we're worried that eventually it's going to happen because it will. So some of the poskim, and this posek who turned to Rav Asher Weiss said, maybe that's why we have kashrus organizations. Because the question here is not me. I happen to be stuck in, right? I had a friend who was, a few years younger than me, who was in Gush when I was in the Kollel, who asked me, he recently spent 2.5 weeks in Patagonia. So he asked me his kashrus shaylas. So sure, one person is off in Patagonia, right? How many frum Jews are at the tip of Patagonia, right? It's him and his 2 friends who got a grant from Princeton to go to Patagonia to write a short story. That was actually what happened. Fine. So he asked me kashrus questions. So what I'm telling him is different than what the leaders of the community have to paskin for everybody, because the chances for him, I can say, okay, there's, right, not that I did in the end. He brought his food. But I'm saying in theory, I could have told him, there's bittul, there's namanos, there's this, there's that. You can, because who is there, right? How many people are going to happen? So I can rely on bittul. But if I'm now the posek and I'm making a decision for everybody, and the question is it better to leave it without a kashrus organization or not? So this posek turned to Rav Asher Weiss and said, this is why we need kashrus organizations. Because yeah, it's a 1 in 60, it's a 1 in 100, it's a 1 in 1,000, but you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of Jews, with millions of Jews. It'll happen that one of them will eat not kosher, and therefore we have to worry about it. But Rav Asher Weiss turns back to him in 9. He says, really? That's what you're telling me? He says, Mikol Mako. He said, the Ramban, you're right, said that in the case of marrying on Wednesdays. But that's not the answer that anybody else gave. They didn't make any distinction between the majority and the minority. Nira de lo savru kitzvar Shiur Yaakov. They don't hold like that. They don't believe that's true. Amnam. He says, Ein ze elu b'mad efshar. And he says, and even if you want to say it's true, so it's only true when it's possible. B'mad lo efshar samchin aruba b'chol davar. And if it's not possible, so then you do rely on the majority. And besides, the question of whether you worry about a common minority, right, something which is not, which according to poskim ranges from 4% to 49%, or what's probably actually true, what Rav Asher Weiss says, Rav Wosner says, at Mian Hamatzui is something which is a minority, but you wouldn't be surprised if it happened. The fact that we worry about that, it's a machloket, it's a dispute whether that's biblical or rabbinic. I think even that's rabbinic. So he said, it's true, you can make an argument based on Ramban and the Yeshua Yaakov, but most Rishonim don't say that. And what evidence do you have that that's a majority view in Rishonim? Right? The majority of people think that we don't allow you to rely on minorities and bittul and nullification in the majority. Who says? Right? Who says? And then he says. So he says, I'm not convinced. Right? He says, I'm not convinced halachically you're right. And therefore he says, on a pure halachic level, I think it's not true. Then he says, when we call makom, hanach lehem liyisrael, im lo neviim heim b'nei neviim heim. Right now I'll read the English. He says, leave the Jews to their ways. If they're not prophets, they're the children of prophets. And it's correct for the kosher organizations to investigate, search, and clarify everything as much as they can to avoid forbidden foods, which are not only forbidden, but clog up the heart of man. So here he makes some meta-arguments. He said, first of all, this is what Klal Yisrael is doing. And if they're doing it, there must be a reason. And he said, I'll give you a reason. Because especially the Mikubalim pick up on this line in Chazal, that not kosher food is not just forbidden, but it's metamteim and alev. It clogs up your spiritual arteries. So he said, so there's a reason. You don't want to, right? The same thing with the FDA, right? The FDA doesn't want 1 in 1,000 people dying. Well, the rabbis, or the FDA of the Jews, don't want their spiritual arteries to be clogged with not kosher food. So he says, I don't buy. So he says the Yeshua Yaakov is a formal halachic argument. That is, when you're talking about a community, you have to worry about it. But he says, I don't love it on a formal level, but on a meta level, I hear it. On a meta level, I hear it. Now, the problem, obviously, is that all of this is great, except it's still true that until the 50s, 60s, 70s, right, and then it sort of exploded in the 70s, there weren't kosher organizations for all of history, right? So you have to ask for that in sort of the industrial sale, and you look at Rishonim, they didn't, right? They relied on bittul and they relied on sveikos, and that was for the community, and no one ever said this. So, on a formal halachic level, it's hard to justify it, which is what he says. On a meta level, you can say, okay, but they couldn't do it, and we can, right? So why not go for the better one, at least on a meta level? But then he says, you have a question?
I just wanted to say, if it's going to be kosher, if it's kosher with this concept.
Right, so that's part of the problem, is that the bittul, right, you're assuming that when something is batel, it's not really kosher. If you just say, no, it becomes kosher, or if it's suffix, now it becomes kosher. Correct, so there's two things, really. One is bittul, right? Nullification, it's easier to say, yes, it's now all kosher. Even that's not totally clear, but fine, that's a machloket in how you understand a Rosh and a Rashba and many other things. The other problem is sveikot, right, is doubt. In doubt, you could have something which is actually not kosher. You're allowed to assume it's not there, but it might actually be there. Right? So those are different things that kosher organizations do. They're avoiding bittul, but also avoiding sveikos. What? Well, yeah, and then one of the big modern questions, obviously, right, one of the big modern issues, in addition to the lard and the ingredients, whatever, we should have mentioned it before, is bishalako, right, is the fact that a big problem is if non-Jews cook it, right, it becomes not kosher. So that's another reason to need a mashgiach. Again, that would answer why certain things need it, not things which are not olal shulchan malachim, right, which aren't eaten at a royal banquet, or things which are eaten raw, right? For different things. There are all types of good practical reasons. But on the fundamental level, Rav Asher Weiss, beyond that, there's also something to avoiding spiritual contamination. And he says, furthermore, it is clear that with regards to kosher, the courts and leaders of the generation must stand guard, set up decrees that are needed for the time. The Tur writes in the name of the Rosh that even though one witness is believed in ritual slaughter, said the custom of the diaspora is not to believe butchers, but rather to appoint known people to supervise, and only they are believed. As in their times, they knew that we can't rely on butchers. Now we know we can't rely on others when there's a temptation of money. Right? Rav Asher makes a very simple argument. One of the reasons I think you need kosher organization is because it used to be you could rely on people, and now you can't because there's a lot of money in industrial kashrut. There's a lot of money, right? I don't just mean in the kashrus. I mean in industrial food, right? And therefore, there's also money in industrial kashrut. We know that. That's true. I don't want to talk about that because you're going to get in a rant. I don't want to talk about it. There's money in industrial kashrut, but the reason there's money in industrial kashrut is because there's money in industrial food, right? That's why there's money there. There's money where there's money. And he said, as they're concerned, they will stumble. We cannot rely on one who has a vested monetary interest. And then I just put 3 more points. He said, beyond that, I'm just summarizing the rest of the tshuva. He says, the cases of nida, kasher, and chametz, right, which are certain cases where we don't rely on bittul, we make you actually check. So he said, doesn't that show that you have to check? You can't rely on all these halachic loopholes, whatever, these halachic rules of leniency? He says no, because that's the whole point. These are exceptions, right? Normally we do allow you to rely on these. The second thing he says is, I've tried to justify this need for cautious organizations by saying that we shouldn't rely on chazakot, and we shouldn't rely on bittul, and we shouldn't rely on all those halachic rules, and maybe at least for a spiritual reason. But he said, remember, this is a meta-argument, and with any meta-argument, sometimes you apply it, and sometimes you don't. It's more of a tendency than a rule. So he says, in some cases, we really do rely on chazakot for communal purposes. We do, right? Example, we assume that 13-year-old boys have reached physical maturity, and allow them to act as an adult, and allow them to run for the Amud, even though we know that not every 13-year-old boy has reached physical maturity in his bar mitzvah, right? That's a good example where you know that there are a significant number of boys who in fact have not reached physical maturity at 13, and yet we don't make you check. So he says, don't tell me that we always do this. We sometimes do. And therefore, he says, hence his argument above, that it depends on how onerous it is to check. So Rav Asher Weiss, it's a very sort of moderate claim, which he says, look, halachically, I'm not convinced you need it. Sometimes in communal situations, we really do rely on all these rules. Sometimes we don't. So if it's not too onerous, and how you define too onerous, I'm not going to get into, because that's subjective. So he said, if it's not too onerous, I understand there's a value to looking to be more careful when you're dealing with a community, because there will be problems. And then we can add what she doesn't add. And there really are real issues, practical issues, right? The coating of the cans and the things which are made by food chemists for tastes and bishul akum, right? All those things are real issues. But at the end of the day, there are still cases where he said, but if it's too onerous, or if it's too hard, right? Historically, we didn't have cautious organizations, and an argument could be made that in certain circumstances you, in fact, wouldn't need it. So that brings us to my last point. I'll do this and then I'll summarize, which is often the danger with meta-arguments is meta-arguments can go in both directions. So Rav Asher Weiss presented the meta-argument for one side, which is when you're dealing with a tzibur, he didn't totally buy it, but he sort of bought it. Then when you're dealing with a community, so we should look to up the standards. But I gave you from Rabbi Dr. Adam Mintz's dissertation on Eruvin, Rabbi Price's argument for building the Eruv, which is sometimes we do the opposite, right? Sometimes when we're dealing with a community, we don't look for chumrah, we look for kulot, because there's the counter claim, which is, yes, you want to raise your standards when you're dealing with everybody, but on the other hand, when you're dealing with everybody, right, you have to take their distress or their need more seriously, which would lead us not to stringency, but to leniency. So I gave you his example from Eruvin, right? In the last section of his essay, right, Price addresses those machmirim, the stringent ones, who tried to gather all the stringencies and declare the Toronto Eruv invalid. I know, I'm putting all the political things in one shiur. I know. He responds there, and then we're doing child abuse the next shiur. I don't know what we're thinking. Okay, fine. We're thinking that we're not sleeping I've been up since 3:30 in the morning. That's what's going on. He responds to their claim by asserting that the tradition throughout the ages, from the Talmudic period to the present day, is to be lenient in the laws of Eruvin. He cites a proof from the Gemara, which the Gemara says that if the rabbis restrict and did not allow the creation of an Eruv Chatzer and Yom Tov, there would be great harm since people would forget and carry on the Sabbath. Right? Blais explains that this Gemara explains that being strict regarding Eruvin leads people to sin. Right? Sometimes when you try so hard, so you make more things treif. If you make more things treif, then people won't eat kosher. Right? If you said rely on the kulot, right? If you told people that it's not 1,000 things which are kosher, it's 10,000 things which are kosher, right? They might keep kashrus more. Right, there might be more likely than if you said only 1,000 things are. So yes, right, the frum community who will only buy things with the best of achsherim. So sure, you've upped their standards, but what are the people on the fence, right? You always have to take in the opposite argument. So meta-arguments cut in both directions, right? And then Ray Price at the end noted that his Eruv didn't rely on kulot. Despite that, he says it would be legitimate to rely on kulot, but okay, that was the end of his argument. So what I want to summarize until now is, do you need industrial kashrus? So, okay, question one is the formal halachic one, is can you rely on bittul, can you rely on sveiko, can you rely on all those things? And so there is an argument to be made that once you have a kosher organization, you can't rely on it, right? Because of Rebbe Akiva Eiger, because it's made for you, because the mashgiach is in charge. But that begs the question, because if you didn't have a kosher organization, it might not be a problem. So then you have to invoke meta-arguments or practical arguments. The meta-argument is when you're doing something for a community, you want to raise the standards. The practical argument is nowadays you have problems with bishul akum on industrial level, right? Of non-Jews cooking it, so you need a Jew to turn on the flame so everything will be kosher. You have things which are made in a food laboratory that you have no idea what it is, but it's made for taste and therefore is not kosher and would make the whole thing not kosher, and that's a real problem. You have cans which have with lard. A lot of these things are changing because of the allergens, because now people are much more sensitive to things like that, which I don't know what that's going to look like in 50 years, and I do think that is a game changer. I'm not sure what will happen, but I'm predicting that things will start to change, because allergens really have changed the sensitivity of things like the FDA. But there's the meta-argument that you want to be more machmir of the community, but as I mentioned at the end, the danger of meta-arguments is it sometimes cuts in both directions. On the one hand, you want to be more strict when you're dealing with a community. On the other hand, you want to recognize that when you're dealing with a community, you're dealing with people who can't really be that strict, can't afford to be that strict, which would push us towards leniency. People are coming in, I think, now for the child abuse one, so I'll take questions. What time is it? I have another 3 minutes. Okay, so one question, and then we're going to have to stop.
The sap from the trees, they always thought there was no problem. What's it called? The maple syrup.
Yeah.
There was no problem with that. There was. What they found out was, somebody accidentally found out.
They used lard
that
on
they were
the...
using lard to sift it through.
Right.
Nobody realized it.
Right, exactly.
You
So
have to-
so again, so the reasons, so at the end of the day, I think right, it's a good thing we have it on balance, right? Because of the meta-arguments of keeping kosher and the practical problems cautious in 2016. But again, remember that this is an argument for 2016. What will be true in 50 years with allergens and the like, right? Remember that once you lose the practical arguments, what you're left with is the halachic argument, which is shaky for a few reasons. It's a good argument, but not an ironclad argument. And then the meta-arguments, which can cut in both directions. So at this point in 2016, yes, kosher organizations serve a very important purpose. What will happen in 50 years as we become more sensitive to allergens and you can't get away with things like that and there's more transparency? I'm not sure. It's an interesting question, but this is the groundwork for the type of discussion people will be having over the next 50 years. In 50 years from now, I'll come back and then maybe people will care what I say because I'll be 78, right? Okay.